Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. I walked down the hallway here this morning early, seeing all the projects that are going on. Wow. It's wonderful. All right, enough about me. I want to talk about why anarchy, or voluntarism, to use an analogous term, really is our natural state. And what I mean by that is the way we are, the way mankind is, when we're not forced to be otherwise. And that's really what we're trying to get back to here. We have this instinct, some of us, most of us, probably all of us in here, we want liberty. Well, liberty, we want liberty. We want to be free. That's really good, and it's really useful. But there's a purpose to liberty. Liberty is the condition that allows humans to grow and to mature and to become better and more than what we are. You can't do that living inside of a dominance hierarchy. It's always hard. There are always clashes. There are always difficulties. Liberty is the condition in which we can actually grow and unfold, evolve, if you want to use that word. So it's of crucial importance. And anarchy really is our natural state. And what I want to show you today, I'm going to use a lot of images rather than just explanations and proof texts and so on, because I want you to get this into you. I don't want it to be just something you feel and then you come up with a good explanation for what you feel. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. We all need that to some extent. But I want you to get this in your bones. I want you to understand what this really is, that our natural state, the way we are naturally, is really a voluntaristic way of life, and it's better for us. It's necessary not for us so much as our descendants. Humanity has so much growth left. We're so far from what we can be. Not that we're bad, but we're so far from what we could be and what we will be. Our descendants need us to work for this so that they have a shot at getting there faster rather than moving along by inches at a time like we have been for so long. So, pardon me, this is very important. Let me start right here. This is the Obsidian trade routes of 7,000 BC. Okay? 4,500 years before there were pyramids. Okay? Long time ago. Now, obsidian is wonderful for this. It's this volcanic glass. And with modern technology, we can define exactly which volcano it came from. Doing some very basic chemical analysis, we know what volcano it came from. We also know where the archaeologists dug it up. Okay? We also found out that when you cut obsidian, which they always do because it makes these wonderful, super sharp blades. I mean, sharper than most of the blades you have in your home. And so whenever it's cut, water seeps in through that cut surface at a very, very predictable rate. And all those together allow us to make these, to chart their trading routes. And this is 7,000 BC. And this was people just getting up and going. So what do people do in their natural state? When they're unopposed, unobstructed, they get up and they trade. This is a 2,000-mile arc. Okay? I mean, depending how you count it all, but it's roughly a 2,000-mile arc. And these people were just getting out and going and doing and finding people in very distant locations and just cooperating. Hi, I got this. You want to trade me for it? This was going on all the time, and I have some of these that go back even further. So this is what has been going on. This is what humans in their natural state do. Now, look way over on the side here. You can see I circled one. The site has been No palace, nothing. The archaeologists have a real hard time with this because, they go to school and they're just, buried with state form. And, some of them are honest. I mean, some of these archaeologists are very good at what they do. And they say, even though there's no evidence of war, there's no evidence of any sort of destruction, just looks like everybody started moving away. And these are the people, by the way, I won't go through this today, it's an old lesson, or even earlier if you go a little further east. You can trace them all the way until they reach Ireland in about 3000 or 3500 BC. And you can trace what this was. This was a peaceful anarchy. There is no evidence that anybody has ever found. Some goofy theories, I won't go into it, just goofy theories to try to explain how people were there. They were, psychologically preparing themselves to be ruled. It's almost that silly. I'm presenting it, in our sort of way, but that's really almost what they say. But it was there, and like I say, most of it has been dug up, and I want you to see how these people were living in the supposed caveman time. Again, 4,500 years before the pyramids were ever built. Okay? This is the interior, a recreation of one of their houses. This is the main room, or one of the main rooms. I won't go through all the details. They had to have a skin over there in the corner because, it's, prehistoric, so there's got to be a skin somewhere, right? In fairness, I'm sure people were making skins. It was, a useful technology in the age. But this is one of their houses. And they had, beds, little pallet areas, slightly raised. They were essentially beds. They had an oven. And they had a lot of stuff. I want you to see some other things that they had. That's some nice jewelry. This is what these people were wearing at 7000 BC. They were clean. They took care of themselves. They adorned themselves. Again, 7000 BC. Here is some of their art. Now, not a lot of art survives after 9,000 years, but they found a little bit of it that was still there. And I think it's fascinating. And this is 9,000-year-old art. There was art all over this city, all the walls, and they did funny things. They would live, they all built their own houses. They had their own walls, their own houses. Everybody did their own. And when they stopped using the house, they would burn it out. They would set a fire and just burn everything, knock down the walls, make a new foundation, and start building again. Very interesting. Again, there's a lot more to this. Here is what they did. They danced. 9,000 years ago, the first city was a peaceful anarchy, and they danced. And there's other stuff. I'll give you one more. This one is a big deal to me. These were tender, caring people. This is a grave, and this was drawn right over it by one of the archaeologists. Exactly it was as it was, and it was put this way on purpose. These two people were buried together. We don't know if it was a mother and child or a father or a husband and wife. We can't really tell. A 9,000-year-old skeleton, it's pretty hard to tell, but there's certain characteristics of these particular skulls that would make it appear that they were strongly related. And they buried them together like this on purpose. So people in their natural state do not devolve into a war of all against all and life is nasty, brutish, and short. That is false. That is not the way it is. Of course there are problems. There are always problems. We still have problems. None of this is perfect. These people were neither primitive brutes nor some kind of superior species. They were us in different circumstances. Grossly ignorant in many ways compared to what? Compared to us. But also unfettered by dominance hierarchies, by living a life where you're told and forced what to do, where the central motto of life is, do what we say or we'll hurt you. They didn't have to live with that. And even in their ignorance, this is how they lived at 7,000 BC. Now, let me jump ahead to those pyramids. Egypt, as it happens, was the most hierarchical, most long-lasting of the ancient kingdoms. And I want you to see why. I use this map because it shows very nicely the green, where there was actually fertile area, and then everything else where you want to go out there, you're probably going to die. And there was nowhere for anybody to go. The kings controlled the river, and if you wanted to be near the river where you could actually grow food, you were going to obey the kings because they had all the biggest, strongest guys with all the best swords. And that's the way it was. And that is exactly why Egypt survived for as long as it did. And that's how Egypt operated. All the rest is just promotion, all the stuff having to do with the pharaoh and the temples and this and that. Think about Egypt. What did we get from Egypt? Elite monuments. That's it. I mean, mummies, it's interesting. Somebody had to figure that out, gross, but somebody finally figured it out. How does that help us today? It's a curiosity. It's interesting, but that's it. We got from Egypt, from this stratified hierarchical civilization, elite monuments, which were, to be honest about it, compliance propaganda. That's what it was. All the inscriptions and everything else, it was all about, the great pharaoh is necessary to keep things coming up and down from between, the gods and the earth, and if we don't do it, then bad things will happen. We won't have our harvests, and you got to listen to the priests because they hoarded all of the astronomical knowledge, which was the big thing at the time, so you knew when to plant. And you knew when to pull up your crops. And when you knew when the first freeze was likely, and when the floods were going to come. That was the important knowledge of the era. And it was hoarded. There was no separation of knowledge and state, or at least not enough. And all of these things I'm making, generalizations because, this is millions of people over thousands of years. There's exceptions to everything. Okay, but this is the way Egypt operated. Now I want you to see what happened next, because at about 1200 BC, pretty much everything in the Eastern Mediterranean, pretty much the entire Mediterranean civilization, everything burned. And it's a fascinating little passage of history called the collapse of the Bronze Age or something like that. There's different names. Everything burned. Even Egypt, which was the mighty one, just barely survived. And what came next were the Greeks. From 1200 to 800 BC, roughly, is what we call the Dark Ages of the Greeks. And everything in the Eastern Mediterranean devolved onto the family level. All of the powers that be, all of the great grand poobahs were all gone. And power devolved down to the family level. And I want you to see how incredibly decentralized Greece was. There were roughly 1,000 different city-states. And these people did not call themselves Greeks. Somebody lived in Corinth, they said, where are you from? I'm a Corinthian. If you lived in Ephesus, what are you? Oh, I'm an Ephesian. I'm an Athenian. I'm a Spartan. I'm a whatever, 1,000 different places. So this is the way they thought of themselves. Their religious and mythological beliefs were decentralized. Each city had its own. Now, they shared a lot, and especially after Homer in 700-something BC, they had a list, and there was others. It wasn't just Homer. Anyhow, but there was no central priesthood, central this, central anything. Every town had their own. So the Greeks, while the Egyptians gave us, elite monuments and mummies, the Greeks gave us philosophy, geometry, other advanced mathematics, geography, big deal in the old days, knowing where to sail your ship and how to get back there. They gave us drama, science as we know it. They gave us, believe it or not, the sitcom. Yeah. Nobody knows that, but it's true. They called it the new comedy. They had what we would call a sitcom. And so we got all of this from this decentralized civilization where power devolved right down to the family level, all through this area. And this is what produced the science, the philosophy, and so on that we enjoy to this day. It wasn't Egypt. It was Greece. Now, again, they weren't perfect, but they gave us a whole heck of a lot. And another one thing that's very fascinating about the Greeks and, of course, the Romans, who kind of took over their model a few centuries later, it was a pointed rejection of kings. No king for us. That's it. The Romans, in about 509 BC, when they really got their act together, so to speak, they were very jealous of their own rights, and you couldn't just, you had to, if you had a problem, you had to take it to the forum before you just went out and attacked your neighbor. And they were very clear on that, except one of the very first things they said, they made a decision and said, okay, if you hear somebody say that he's going to make himself king, just kill him. You don't have to have a trial. Just kill the guy, we'll back you up. If he wants to make him king, just kill him. It's okay. Yeah, for real. No rude comments. Now, this is interesting. This is the graph of empires. Just about every empire, with little variances here and there, because it's always complicated, goes through this process. And I want you to understand something. This is the same graph for the relationship of predator and prey, and it is the same graph for the relationship of parasite and host. I did not know that when I drew it. And then afterwards, so this is the graph for Rome. This is, I won't go through all the details. It began 500 and something BC, and then it finally centralizes here, and the empire begins, and then you see the emoluments come after that, and then it collapses and comes back down. When Rome collapsed, when we get to the edge of this here, civilization restarted for Europe. Rome was a dominator. Rome was difficult, and it was a dominating, proud domination society. And when it finally ended, things devolved, decentralized once again. So from, let's say, 350 to 650 was Rome really kind of fell apart, and it didn't really fall like people say. It kind of dissolved, and it's all very complicated. But in the wake of that, Europe went to an anarchy. Power again devolved down to just about the family level. And I want you to read this. I'll read this to you. It's from not a libertarian historian, but from a very, very mainstream and famous historian named Carol Quigley. By 900 AD, there was no empire, no state, no public authority. The state had disappeared, yet society continued. It was discovered that men can live without a state. It was discovered that economic life, religious life, law, and private property can all exist and function effectively without a state. This is Europe in the 600s, 700s, 800s, 900s, 1000s AD. It was not the Dark Ages we were taught. I mean, I know the Dark Ages stuff. It makes for a great Monty Python film. I mean, it really, and that's really, to be honest, where I think a whole lot of us have our images of the Dark Ages. It's, Monty Python and digging in the mud, which was, funny and all, but it really wasn't true. It was a devolution. It was dark because the historical records stopped, because historical records were kept by kings. In the 15th year of my reign, I made war against the evil hordes across the mountain, and we destroyed, so on and so forth. The historical records were kept by kings. So when historians of the 18th, 19th century went through them, there was darkness. There was nothing. They couldn't find anything. I mean, the truth is that there was, and there is now. There's actually some good historians now doing justice to this. If you ever have a chance, read the great Peter Brown. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. So people are doing some justice to it now, but this idea of the Dark Ages that we have was really false. It was a time when people were free to go out and do something. I'll throw one quick thing in here. During this era, there were at least 100,000 castles and fortified dwellings in Europe. 100,000. Now, most of them weren't giant stone things. They were wooden things. But they were their own fortified houses. Because if you wanted to go out and to go build something and to have, this is going to be my property and my area, and I'm going to build this defensive house. You do your own defense. And this is the way it worked in that era, because the threat was guys with swords. So you build really strong walls and stuff, and the guys with swords have a hard time, and you can shoot some arrows at them. If you wanted to do that, there was probably no one that's going to stop you. Now, there were a few, warlords that had descended more or less, carrying on from Roman senators and so on. And if you, got onto their turf, well, maybe you'd have some problems, but they were kind of few and far between for a good long time. Even in the 800s, the son of Charlemagne, the great emperor from those times, was having all sorts of trouble with people building castles in the stuff he controlled that he thought was his. They had all kinds of trouble with it. So if you wanted to during this era, you could go out and strike out on your own, and many, many people did, hence the 100,000 castles. If you run the numbers, it comes to something like one for every 20 or 30 extended families. Yikes. You could go do it if you wanted to. There wasn't anybody telling you couldn't. So, again, from this situation arises civilizations that are of massive benefit to mankind that brought us here. From here, we got, it's not the greatest quality, we got what I'll call the Christian capitalist civilization of Europe. Now, hours of explanation are required to, go through what I'm meaning by Christian and what I mean by capitalist. But just, I don't want to spend time doing all that. We're talking about, the basic Christian ideas that culminated, that built the idea of the dignity of man, that we are all children of God, that everyone has dignity. Everyone. Okay? That is what created this civilization. However poorly it was done, fine. And I want you to understand how this happened. Rome left behind, depending how you run the numbers, 20 million slaves. Rome was a slave culture. Greece was a slave culture. These were slave economies. That was the economic system, was slavery. And you got to, if you were a slave holder, you gathered your surplus from your slaves. They never got to hold their paycheck in their hand. So you got all of their surplus, and you used it to build your barns or to build, a canal to the river or whatever it was. That was how their system worked. And that's the way the system had worked for untold centuries. These people said, no, we're all sitting together in the same church. We're all children of God. We're not doing that. And these Christians of Europe are the first civilization in the history of the planet that I can find, and I've looked a lot, that killed slavery on a civilizational scale. At 400 and 500 AD in Europe, there were tens of millions of slaves. In 1000 AD, there were none. Okay. These people did it, and they get credit for it, and they're never given credit for this. And they did it. Our ancestors were not idiots. Yeah, they had problems. Well, duh, we still have problems. But they did this. And they had to create an economic system that generated surplus without enslaving anyone. And that is what we come to call capitalism. And what you do in capitalism, as you find out new ways of doing things, you use cleverness to generate surplus. So we don't have to steal it from other human beings anymore. We use our cleverness to create it. So this is the civilization that these people made. And we are still reaping its benefits now. And for all of the mistakes that they made through the years, for all the mistakes that we make, we're still reaping the benefits of this. And these people, so long as I'm able, will get credit for it. Now, let me talk about the next thing that opened up. The Americas. I won't talk about South America. It's a different story and a very unpleasant one, and it's not important here. But North America is a very interesting story. This was an empty continent where it was wild and dangerous. And it was found in, the 1490s and began to be explored. But very, very few people actually came. No one really started coming to the middle 1600s. Almost nobody came in the 1500s to North America. I mean, just about no one. A few traders, a few something. There were slavers at work in South America. But whatever. We don't need to talk about those bastards. America is a wide open place, very dangerous. But the people of Europe, who felt like they were being constrained, who felt like they weren't really living the way they wanted to, even though they couldn't explain it very well, even though they didn't know how to justify it, these people were willing in large numbers to risk their lives. Think about what it required in those days. To risk their lives to come to this beautiful but terribly dangerous place, to have a chance to live their way, to have a chance to live according to their own light, not as they were forced to live by others. And so they came. And from that, we got a whole lot. I want to show you some of the things that happen when people find themselves in an unruled place. This is a lady named Anne Hutchinson. And there are other examples. I like hers in particular, but there's a number of others. Anne Hutchinson was, I suppose, she was a female preacher, probably slightly akin to what we would now call a Baptist. And she was in the Rhode Island colony in the 1830s and became a very, very well-known and well-respected minister, and would travel around with her kids in tow and teaching at all these various places. And as she began to go and began to think about what she was talking about and what she was seeing in the world, she got in a lot of trouble, kicked out of one colony and so on, because this was her conclusion: the unlawfulness of magistry. Not the unlawfulness of one particular magistrate, but the idea of men ruling over other men was wrong. And it was something that was against mankind, that was against God. It was just wrong. This is what happens when people are in conditions where they revert to their natural state. This is what they do. Now, everybody's different. We all have our own little things, and we all, make mistakes along the way and so on. But this is the way people evolve. This is the way they turn when they get that chance. This is the great John Locke who came up with this phrase, the natural state. And by the way, if you ever read Locke's second treatise on government, which is really not that long and not that bad of a read. I recommend it. He talks about, in the beginning, all the world was like America. In those days, that was the America of, of that other picture. And he begins to say, well, this was a brilliant, brilliant man. He begins to say, what is normal for somebody in a natural state? If we're going to analyze government, why don't we just go back to the very beginning and say, what is man? And what is good for man in the natural state? And this is what he came up with. He says, all men are naturally in a state of perfect freedom to order their actions without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. Okay? And this, of course, is what empowered, Thomas Jefferson and Sam Adams and everybody else that was of note or of importance in the American Revolution. He wrote that in 1690. Didn't put his name on it. His name didn't go on until after he was dead because it was, kind of dangerous. But he got the idea, or part of the idea, from seeing what was going on in the Americas. He actually went in 1660 or so to North America. Now, this is a lost chapter of history. Once the government of the United States really took hold in 1789, it was really just along the coast here. That's really all there was. And if you didn't like what Alexander Hamilton was doing with, the whiskey rebellion and all that type of thing, and all of the impositions that were coming and all the crazy judicial decisions that came from the Federalists and so on, you just went farther. You just moved along. Who was going to tell you couldn't? There was just, it was pretty much empty. If there were Indians around, well, some of them were nice and you tried to cooperate with them, and some of them were dangerous and you tried to keep away from them. Well, okay. But what happened is the more government came here, all these people, and they ended up being, they called them utopian communities. There were all sorts of them. There were Christian communities. There were very odd Christian communities. There were socialist communities. This was before socialism was entirely nuts. I mean, there's a difference between the socialists of 1880 and the socialists of 1950, okay? Big difference. Marxism, when Lenin, Bolshevism came in, it's different. You can almost have, some sympathy for the early socialists. They were trying. They were ignorant. You got to have a little bit of, understanding for people who grew up at a time much more ignorant than your own. You have some sympathy for them. They at least had some, they meant well. There were anarchist communities. Benjamin Tucker and all of those people were all here. And they moved all the way across, all through the 1800s, because they wanted to get away from concentrations of power. That and other reasons. But this is entirely lost. There were so many of them that Ralph Waldo Emerson, the famous writer, this was in the 1840s as I recall, made a comment. He said, there's not a reading man in Boston who doesn't have the what did he call it? I don't want to say manifesto, plan. The plan for some community in his vest coat pocket. They've all got one because people were doing this. So it's an entirely lost chapter of history. I counted 118 of these before I just had to, call it off because doing the research is really hard. And, I had other things I had to do. But this is a very important and lost chapter of history, and a lot of good things came out of it. Now, I'm going to jump forward again to my time. Did you make that map? Did you make that map? No, I found that in an old book, and I tried to redraw it, and that's not my forte. Now we're going back to the cypherpunks. Late 80s, early 90s. I stumbled into it in the middle 90s. I want you to understand the power of this. Cryptography is an impermeable defensive weapon. If it's properly implemented, you can't put a bullet through cryptography. It's math. So as long as 2 + 2 = 4, and as long as you implement this correctly, it's just a math problem. You can't break it. Now, if you screw up or, let somebody else run your code, well, you may have a problem. But properly implemented cryptography, the difference in difficulty between encrypting and decrypting is 2 to the 100th power. It's a giant number, 30-some digits long. That's how much harder it is. Like Julian Assange says, the universe favors encryption. And it does. It really does. It's awesome stuff. So we had, a group of clever lads who began to see this, and then there were these guys, Diffie and Hellman, who were university guys who came up with this fascinating and brilliant idea of public key exchange. And it was a way you could exchange cryptographic keys in the open and still not compromise the security. And that's why anybody who's used PGP or GPG, you have a public key and a private key. And you can share the public key and you can give it to the whole world. And it does not diminish the safety of your communications. It's a fascinating thing. They developed it in, I think, 74. So this new internet thing begins coming around. It was formerly a plaything in university labs and so on. And it begins coming out in the late 80s. And these guys are saying, wait a minute. We've got this decentralized way to communicate with everybody. And we've got cryptography that's essentially city walls around anything we want to do. We have it in our power to create the world over again. It's going to be within the walls of cryptography. But we can create the world over again. This is what the cypherpunks came from. It was this concept. And again, it was goofy, it was crazy, there was all kinds of stuff going on. There was good ideas, there were bad ideas. There were times when it was exciting, there were times when nothing happened for 5 years. It was complicated. But these are the basic ideas. And from that came Bitcoin. One of the clever lads, or lasses, or maybe a group of them, put together Diffie-Hellman's key exchange. I'm not sure if they included much of David Chaum. He was important in the early days. But they took key exchange. They took Adam Back's proof of work. They took Hal Finney's reusable proof of work. Ralph Merkel's hash trees. Bram Cohen's BitTorrent. And an understanding of incentives from Austrian economics, and put it all together. And out at the end came Bitcoin. And again, when you have this, is again another one of these situations where you have people who have the ability to live as they wish, who can conceive and feel something again of the natural state. Once they have that, good things happen. And out came Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a miracle. Now, Bitcoin is not perfect. It was already upgraded several times. It has, more upgrades, and it doesn't do this and it does do that. Bitcoin started from absolutely nothing. Not just nothing, but a despised nothing. 11 years ago. And it's still here. And it's still functioning. And it has the powers that be a little bit afraid. Okay? And for one of the few times in history that this happened, it made the right guys rich. That doesn't happen a lot. And it created, the usual human stupidities. You get a guy and then you all of a sudden, whoop, you have $1 million, okay? The guy's probably going to do some stupid things and say some stupid things. That's just life. And we've seen a lot of it in the last 10 years, or last 5 or 6 years. That's okay. We'll deal with that, okay? But Bitcoin is changing the world. It's a really, really big deal. And it came out of this idea of being in the natural state. We have it in our power to create the world over again. Oh my God, we can actually do this. Then, just to keep going with the history, came Ross Ulbricht with the Silk Road. Like it or hate it, everybody became aware of it pretty darn quick. And it was a really clever adaptation so that you could buy or sell anything you want anywhere in the world with rated sellers. And it wasn't just drugs. I mean, drugs was the thing that everybody heard about. Because, if you want to get a bag of some really good pot and you don't want to, do it from some shady character somewhere, you go here. It's eBay. Rated sellers. And they deliver to you. I'm not really a drugs guy, but if somebody that I knew was going to, be getting drugs, I'd rather have them get it here than some dark alley where they're going to get knifed. Probably saved a lot of lives, to be honest about it. But this also gave a big boost to Bitcoin, and it was a really important moment. Now, we're not done. There's more coming, not only in our crypto community and all the things going on here, but we're going to space. I know everybody feels like, yeah, right. It'll happen, yeah, right. Because we've been told, most of us in here, for all of our lives, oh no, I'm the new president, we're going to go to Mars. I've heard that, I don't remember Reagan saying it, I remember Bush 1 and everybody since. We're going to Mars. Yeah, right. That'll happen. Yeah. So, it's going to happen anyway. And the reason is, it's not that hard anymore. Remember, the first mission to the moon was 1968. They landed in 69, but they went first in 68 and orbited and came back. So how old is the technology that landed men on the moon and returned them safely to Earth? 50? 60 when it was maybe when it was originated? Okay, that's old technology. If you look at the computers that landed Apollo 11 on the moon, your cell phone has 250,000 times more computing power than those computers. Yikes. Plus everything else has gotten better. The metals forming technology, the chemistry of fuels, and et cetera, everything is better. It's 60 years. It's a lot better. So it's not that hard. We have a bunch of billionaires, and I really thank them for this, who are putting their money to use to put people in space, hopefully this in 2020. We have all sorts of third world countries. They're not third world anymore, but we think of them that way. They're doing all sorts of things. Did you know that the nation of India has a satellite orbiting Mars? It does. Look it up. The Chinese are launching 40 missions this year. A whole variety of things. They're serious about going back to the moon because they can. It's not impossible anymore. It's not that hard. Yes, it's hard. And yes, like all exploring endeavors, there is going to be loss of life somewhere along the way. Okay, well, sucks. But people are still going to do it. Okay? This is happening. Now, it's going to be sloppy. It's going to be whatever. But this is happening. And I want you to understand that once we leave Earth, the formula for control switches from a square function to a cube function. Those of you who are math geeks, it goes from a square to a cube. Good luck. No less than Freeman Dyson made a comment that once we get to the asteroid belt, the IRS will never find us. Okay? But that's the way it is, and it is going to happen. Now, even more important than that, however, is this. We are building a new model of human cooperation. This model here on the left, that's command and control. The man above you gives you orders, you do it, or if you don't do it, you're going to be punished. That's it. And that has been the model of human cooperation for a long, long time. This is the model that we want to move to. This is the model of Bitcoin. This is the model of the internet. This is the model of healthy families. This is the model of functional community groups, whether it's your little league or a reading group, whatever. This is the model that works. Is it perfect? Is it flawless? No. There's things to work out. Gee, you think there are a few things that are problematic with this one? Okay? Like always everywhere. So this is the model of cooperation that we are moving to. And this is the model of the natural state. This is the model of the future. This is the model that makes it possible for humans to develop as humans, not as nations, but as humans. This is the model that works for us. We've got a lot of work to do. There's still going to be lots of stupidities and lots of mistakes, but this is the model that gets us forward. Now, I want to talk just a couple more things before I close, because we're getting fairly low on time. One of the things we really, really, really need is having transcendent goals. We need to go for things that are really important, that are distant, that are awe-inspiring, that are magnificent goals. Because if we don't, we're going to get stuck arguing about the mundane stupidities of life. My currency does this and your currency doesn't. Or, this is wrong or this is... Let them do their thing, man. Get to the goal. Get to the goal. Yeah, some of these things are stupid or are this or are that. You're going to spend your life being the problem finder, or are you going to spend your life building a better world? We've got it in our hands to create the world over again. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to happen slow. Not going to happen fast. It's going to take time. But it's up to us. We've got it. We've got the tools. They're here. So we have to have transcendent goals. Maybe it's space. Maybe it's feeding the world, because we already know very, very well how to feed every human on the planet. We know really well how to do that. That's no question. We know how to feed everybody, give them cars, give them this, give them that. It's a question of organization, and there's these terrible bottlenecks that are set up in front of us. But we know how to end privation. That information's in our libraries and on the internet. We know how to do that. That's a good transcendent goal. There's a lot of them. Now, what we need to do, probably more than anything else, to be honest about it, is to change the things that matter. We've got a world in front of us with 7 billion people or something, and most of them don't think like we do. They are, they were raised a certain way, they're inside a certain situation. Let's be honest, they're confused. They're afraid. And understandably so. Most of us were there at one time or another too. So it's not to dig on them. But what we need to do is to change our neighbors, to change our friends, our coworkers. See, I like this analogy because this big top over here, the top over here is what you hear all the noise. That's the political stuff and all of the the big noisemakers, everybody from Hollywood to DC to whomever. The big part here are your neighbors. Those are the things we have to change. And I'm going to tell you how we change them. It is by planting discrete seeds, by planting stand-alone seeds in them. We do not try to get them to accept our new ism. You're going to, here's a giant thing with a whole well-thought-out program of ideas and attitudes and programs, and you're going to do that and buy into this. No. We plant seeds. John, I think everybody should be left alone to do whatever they want unless you hurt someone. Huh. Well, pretty much everyone agrees to that. And from that seed, you get that planted in somebody and it stays there, everything else grows out of it. Everything else we want grows out of that one little thing that you can get any 6-year-old to agree to. Johnny, do you think you should be able to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody? Yeah, that makes sense. Just that. Everything else we're talking about grows out of it. We want little seeds to plant in people. You know, Bob, when you think about it, every time we obey, aren't we kind of slapping our own selves in the face? I mean, aren't we spitting on our own mind, our own will, just to obey? Something's messed up. Little seeds, and don't tie them to, now, here is the rest of the plan. Okay? We don't want to do this. Humans are very clever creatures. If you get enough of these seeds in them, they change. It's going to take time. It's slow. It took most of us time. It's going to take time. You keep planting your seeds. Now, let me finish with, come on, there we go. I call it the winning model. Winning is just a bad term. I mean, it's not, I win, you lose. But it gets the point across, so I'll stick with it. This is a quote from the great historian Will Durant. I'll read it to you. And this is a model that is really our model. It's the model that works. Here's what he said. This is in a book he wrote on the Roman Empire and its end. It says, there's no greater drama in the human record than the sight of a few Christians scorned, oppressed by a succession of emperors, bearing all trials with a fierce tenacity, multiplying quietly, building order while their enemies generated chaos, and at last defeating the strongest state that history has known. Christ and Caesar met in the arena, and Christ won. Now, that's a gross simplification of what really happened, but it's kind of true. And I wanted you to see the parallels. Bearing all their trials with a fierce tenacity. Gee, think we've been scorned a little bit? Called crazy? Where's Ross Ulbricht? Where's Julian Assange? Where's Chelsea Manning? Okay? We haven't borne trials? Hell yeah, we've borne trials. And, we continue. Building order while their enemies generate chaos. And that's what we're doing. We're building a new order. We're building a new model of cooperation. While our enemies, generating chaos, there's a lot of that. And at last defeating the strongest state that history has known. So if we continue to do the things that we've been doing, if we do the things that we've talked about here today, in the end, the cypherpunks in the state meet in the arena. The cypherpunks win. So, thank you very much.